Hello, BookTube. It's boiling hot outside and soppingly humid today, which is as sure a sign as any that we are headed to August. We are headed into the last week of July, after which comes August, the dog days of summer. No pun intended. And August is the time of many BookTube events, including the most deplorable BookTube event of them all. The BookTube event your mother warned you about, Garbaugust, which is created, of course, by Criminolly, and which is designed to celebrate trash, designed to celebrate garbage books for the whole of the month. There's a great crew of hosts. We had a Dirty Dozen, and then we added a 13th member for a Dirty Baker's Dozen. And those hosts are our progenitor, Screamin'Creamin'Olly, Shall We Swing Again, Alice and the Giant, Gina Stain Ya, Michael K. Porn, This Just Fits In, Sex Manic, Pegged by Visions, AssHORNY Time, Fibertartsy, another Boobiephile reads Playboy for the articles, yours truly, Steve Donafew, and our Johnny-come-lately to our trashy crew, It Came All Over the Page. I will leave links to all of my horrible, really indefensible co-hosts down below. And there's themes for each week, and those are going to be all sorts of fun, and a few, perhaps, juicy, lurid tensions lurking under the surface of Garbaugust. One in particular that I'm thinking of, because when you have an event that is designed to celebrate trash, one of the first questions that's going to come up is, what is trash? We've got you covered as far as conversation starters go on that subject, but raising that subject at all, it brings up a lurid subplot to Garbaugust that we're going to be talking about in just a bit, because Screamin'Creamin'Olly came up with a tag. Of course, if you're going to have a BookTube event, you have to have a tag to go along with it. This is the Garbaugust Trashy book tag. And I wanted to do it today. Ollie already did his, and I'll leave a link to his video down below. And the prompts are all trash related. But one of the lurid subplots of Garbaugust crops up in the very first question. The first question is, trashy books are often dismissed by the critics. What's a book which is regarded as trash that you think has artistic value? Now, I have answers, but note the juxtaposition there. I was worried about this. I was thinking about it right from the beginning when Garbaugust was in its early stages, when it was just a trashy little bride of Chucky. I was thinking, is this going to come down to readers against critics? Is that what's going to happen here? A naturally partisan question, since of all of the Garbaugust hosts, I'm the only critic. And the question here, trashy books are often dismissed by critics, puts that lurid subplot right in the spotlight. Are trashy books often dismissed by critics and no one else? No, they aren't. Trashy books are dismissed by everybody as trash. We're going to have to discuss this. What is trash, and what is the role of the critic? That's going to bring us to a much vexed question that I never tire of trotting around the block, which is this whole business of it's all subjective. Because that's what's lurking behind not only this question, but any invocation of the critics that happens in the course of Garbaugust. Lurking behind any invocation of critics is going to be, well, it's all subjective anyway. But we don't have to pick that fight right now. So in terms of a book that's regarded as trash, that I think has value, two came to mind. One is a familiar case that I've made on this channel before, and I've managed to get a few of you to try it. It fits with one of the categories. We've been hashing along in our Voxer group. We've been hashing out what are the characterizations of trash. What are some of the ways that you can know that something might be trash? And one of those ways is a movie tie-in. If a book is some kind of movie tie-in, that is a good indication that the book might be trash. For a whole number of reasons. Not only because the writer will be working with material they didn't invent, but the writer will also be working under very strict guidelines and usually an unbelievably tight deadline, so that whatever words they type first are the words they keep. This isn't always true. In a recent video, Michael K. Vaughan, for instance, mentioned a longtime Solomon Kane expert who was tapped to write the movie novelization of the movie Solomon Kane. I don't think in that video that Michael K. Vaughan ever mentions whether or not that novelization is any good. But it certainly merits more consideration for maybe not being the self-evident trash than, for instance, the third movie adaptation novel, the third novelization that Peter David writes in 1 month. But one of the ones that I wanted to mention here is Jaws 2 by Harry Searles, which is technically, anyway, a movie tie-in. It is technically, it is the novelization of the sequel to the movie Jaws. But it's a lot more than that. It's far more a sequel to the novel Jaws than it is to the movie Jaws, and bears very little resemblance to the movie Jaws 2, and is, I think, quite well done. Good luck trying to convince anybody of that. The only people who've ever started to think that maybe I might be right about that are the people that I bought copies for and sent them copies. If you get a mass market paperback in the mail, probably you're going to feel induced to read it. And when the people did, they thought, all right, well, there is something here. This is more than what it needed to be. But for me, when it comes to a book that is regarded as trash that I think has artistic value, I don't think that Jaws 2 has much artistic value. There's a novel that I think is genuinely good. It's not that it has some artistic value. It's that it's genuinely good. And in this case, it's not a movie tie-in. It was a novel long before it was a movie, but the movie is the thing that has permanently branded it as trash. And that's just not fair. It is. Some of you of a certain age are going to laugh, but it's Scott Spencer's novel Endless Love. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie. Remember, the best summary execution of the whole of that movie was done by a friend of mine when the movie came out, and the song Endless Love was inescapable on the radio. Just inescapable. You could not get away from it, no matter where you tuned. You could turn to AM hog futures in the Midwest, and they would break to play that song. And I don't know how many of you know the song. If there's a video for it on YouTube, I'll link to it down below. But at one point in the song, the singer just makes time, just fills the rhythm of the song with, is it Diana Ross? I think it is Diana Ross. She fills the rhythm of the song with just placeholder sounds. And way back then, an old friend of mine said, is she saying dum 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 dum? Is she not even saying words? And that sort of summed up the movie. Is it's Brooke Shields. It's Tom Cruise's first film appearance. It's not good by a long shot. In fact, it's really bad. And its movie poster, its gauzy, out of focus movie poster of two people mashing on each other like they were eating melons, was the cover for the mass market re-release of Spencer's book, and has forever afterwards been tarred and feathered with that movie. I admit the movie's bad. The book is not. The book is not bad. The book is good. I don't know if you'll ever see it used, but if you do, you want to give it a try. It's not what you'll expect. Anyway. Prompt number 2. Critics often love books with extreme or challenging content. Which critically praised book did you think was trash? Notice again the subplot here. One lurid subplot of Garbaugust is it my co-hosts against me? Is it readers against critics? Critics keep being invoked here, and never in a good way, always in an adversarial way. But in terms of the question, which critically praised book did you think was trash? The list is literally endless for me. Literally endless. Most critically praised books, first of all, are literary fiction. I'm assuming that this prompt is not even thinking about biography or history, or genre fiction. Most of it, literary fiction, or some kind of carpetbagger, blackface literary fiction. That a very small coterie of critics can jump on the bandwagon and just get going and all be in agreement there. It's a total lie. That kind of bandwagon jumping is a total lie. Most of the critics involved just want to belong. They never did when they were in grade school. They obviously never did when they were in high school, when they were subject to wedgies, willies, and the dreaded rear admiral. And by the time they got to college, they were so used to being out of step, pasty-faced losers that they didn't even try to belong. Most of them are hopeless, mewling introverts to begin with. They get all the way to the end of that process to be book critics, and suddenly, if there's even the hint of an in crowd, of a cool kids table in the cafeteria, they'll jump through hoops to get to that. They'll say whatever they have to say. They'll praise marvels on the page that they themselves did not see. And when they do that, and they do it every season, regular as clockwork, they are forgetting their only duty. There's not 10 duties here that are ranked in order. There's only one. Their duty is to you, to your wallet, to your time, and to your attention. 3 incredibly valuable resources that are always in shorter supply than any of us want. Your critic has only a duty to that. If your critic forgets that and praises a third-rate piece of garbage to the sky because everybody else is doing it, they are badly, badly failing you. They're badly failing at their only job. And that happens all the time. So I jotted down just a few. I mean, the novels of Sally Rooney, the writing of Brenda Taylor, the racist Brenda Taylor. Oh, obviously, these people are going to be venerated and revered for the rest of their lives, and they write junk. It's junk. it's really bad. It's self-evidently bad. If critics hadn't lined up to sing the praises of the cool kids at the cool kids table in the cafeteria, people would have been pointing out that the empress and emperor have no clothes a long time ago. Instead, only a few critics ever do that. The ones that have a fairly secure footing underneath them, and that weren't mewling introverts when they were in school. You're not an introvert, are you? No, you're not. You're an extrovert, just like me. Do you want to come down, little girl? Is that why? Is that why you're futzing around up there? Yes. There you go. All right, let's block this thing. But also, like for instance, we were talking about contemporary stuff. There's Lapvona, Tessa Moshfez's wretched new book, just wretched, that has received a fairly substantial river of ink. It does not deserve that much attention, and most of the ink has been ambivalent or praising. It's junk, absolute junk. Sometimes critically praised books are worse than junk. Think about The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin, an intensely racist book. Intensely racist. As bad and insinuating a piece of racist garbage as I have read since I read the Turner Diaries. A world in which all cultures and all skin colors have viable, living, visible biospheres, except anything white-skinned. Anything white-skinned is bad. The main villain is called white. And also, anything white-skinned does not have a culture. It does not have a city. It does not have any social resonance. It's just evil. It's just a void where something should be and isn't. I know the book probably has a lot of fans out there, but read it. Read your copy and substitute Jewish. Substitute the word Jewish for the word white all throughout the book and see what happens. Substitute anything other than white. This is The City We Became is pretty much the quintessential example of what I refer to on this channel as the casual racism of the 21st century, which has as an article of faith that you cannot be racist towards white people. Where have you heard that before? 1930s South, I think? 1930s Georgia? Was there a group you couldn't be racist against? And the list goes on and on and on and on and on. I guarantee you that virtually everything, without exception, in the Booker long list will be a book that was critically praised, but that I thought was trash. The Penn-Faulkner long list, the literary long list for every award from now on. So, with a few, there'll be weird exceptions from time to time, but usually not. It's the thing I have to deal with a lot. That if you don't read new releases, you're blissfully free of that. That's one of the only things I read. Largely new releases. 70-80% of my reading is new releases, and I also live and work in that world, and I love it. I absolutely love it. Don't get me wrong. I'm kvetching now, but I love it. I even love the kvetching. But one of the only ways I envy people who just go to the library and read anything that's, from 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, whatever strikes their fancy. One of the only reasons I envy them, that's the way they've chosen to read, and that's fine. But one of the only ways I envy them is that they don't ever have to deal with that. They can just assess the book. They don't even need to know what the contemporaneous critical atmosphere about that book was. They don't even need to know what that is. Someday. Maybe if I retire. I can't imagine getting out of the game. Let's see here. Prompt number 3 is not everyone approves of trashy books. You can just hear the prompt saying critics don't approve. Oh, we're going to have to hash this out. What's a book you wouldn't read in public? And here, I know it's a little bit spoil sporty, but there isn't one. Even when there were no ebook options, when ebooks weren't an option, I will read anything. What I'm reading is what I'm reading at the moment. What on earth is the peril? Even before the days of a Kindle, when you could read in complete anonymity, what on earth, to me, would have been the peril of reading anything on the subway here in Boston? I did read anything on the subway here in Boston. What would have been the peril? That somebody makes a withering, condescending remark? It's happened over the decades. I've always been nice about it, laughed it off. I don't want to be confrontational on the subway. You never know who's armed or who's crazy. But here on this channel, I can certainly respond the way you predict that I would. If you go out of your way to sneer openly at what I'm reading on the subway, let's match reading. Let's match your reading against mine. If you're claiming that I'm somehow a poor reader or not a real reader or letting the side down, let's match our reading. Let's see who reads what in the course of a year and who's read what in the course of their lives. What's the peril to me? None at all. None at all. And, this is meaningless too, but if I'm reading a Regency romance with a pink cover on the subway, again, what is the peril to me? Not everybody has that freedom, but I'm a big, fat, gray-haired, bulbous-nosed Irish Catholic guy on a Boston subway system. If you walk up to me because I'm reading a pink-covered romance novel and you want, I don't even know, to challenge my masculinity, that's not going to last very long. It's ridiculous. Those things are ridiculous. No, there isn't any factor that would ever cause that. The closest I would come would be the kind of censorious situation that Ollie actually invokes in his own version of this tag, which is a cover that kind of sort of looks like pedophilia. He says the book is not, but the cover kind of sort of looks that way. And I've seen covers of especially Lolita that, that someone might wonder what you're reading. But I'm never in that situation. So, no, there isn't any book that I wouldn't read in public. In fact, I kind of miss it. I kind of miss the days when, every hand on a subway, on a crowded subway, well, there are no crowded subways anymore that I go on. You'd be crazy to do it. They're COVID factories. But once upon a time, before the pandemic, I used to go on the subway a lot more often when my previous 2 dogs were in that stage in their life where they were very old, but they weren't yet sick. They weren't yet dying. So they were very old. Some of you are in that position now, I'm sure, where your dog sleeps 20 hours a day, maybe more. And that's all there is to it. It's not because they're bored or because you're not playing with them enough. It's all they want to do. So there was what, 5 years, 6 years, where my girls, we would go out for our walk in the morning. It would be slow and it would exhaust them. We would come in, I would settle them, I would make sure they were comfortable, I would mash their food and give it to them. I'd make sure they had plenty of water. I would settle them down on their cushions or on the couch. I would watch as they fell sound asleep, deeply sound asleep. And I would just quietly get ready and go. Just go out and do a whole bunch of stuff. Go out and do all sorts of errands. I knew perfectly well what ended up always being true. I would come back 3 hours later, and they would be exactly where I had left them, still sound asleep. They wouldn't wake up when I opened the door. They would only wake up when I went over and gently started touching them. That's just the way it is. And during those years, and I've had those years with many dogs, then I would go out, and so I was often familiar with very crowded subway cars. I also had 25 years where I went to a retail job, so you're stuck. You got to go whenever your shift is, and I miss the days when I got to look at all the books that people had out and reading. I almost never see them anymore. People are on their phones. Even if they're reading on their phones, I can't tell. I started many a conversation. I guess I am the aforementioned extrovert. I started many a conversation on Boston subway cars because of that. I would see somebody reading a book, and I would say, "Oh my, you please tell me you're enjoying that," or "Oh my, look at how far along you are," or whatever. And people, once they realized that I was not crazy, they loved it. They loved talking about it. And we don't get that anymore. Every once in a blue moon, I will see a book on the subway, but it's all phones now. Let's see here. Number 4, books about killer animals are almost always trashy. I wanted to make that point when The Revenant was suddenly getting a burst of second life because of Leonardo DiCaprio's Oscar-winning movie, the movie in which Leonardo DiCaprio finally won an Oscar for grunting and snorting like a wounded animal for 2.5 hours. No acting at all in The Revenant on his part. A couple of other people in the movie did act. He did not. He just suffered the whole movie, and he got an Oscar for it. But when that happened, the novel, The Revenant, is about the same thing. It's about a guy who gets nearly fatally mauled by a grizzly bear. The novel got a little second burst of life, and I wanted to point out then, I didn't know about Garbaugust then, but I wanted to point out, this novel's about a lot of other things, but none of it would happen if not for a giant killer animal. But anyway, what animal would you least like to be attacked by? And in his version of this tag, which I think is the only other one up, all he says slugs. He would hate to be just sort of gradually, slowly consumed by slugs. And he specifically mentions that for him, far preferable would be the quick, clean death of a great white shark. But for me, it's a great white shark. Absolutely. The very idea that a 15-foot fish that's virtually unstoppable and can move at 50 miles an hour when it's getting ready to strike you could be lurking just under the water anywhere that you go into the water in the ocean is just terrifying to me. This thing that seems to exist for no other reason, well, as Hooper says in the movie Jaws, it swims and it eats and it makes little sharks, and that's all it does. That is just horrifying to me. When I listened to an oceanographer friend of mine years ago said, if you have ever been in the ocean, anywhere in the world, you have been within 10 feet of a shark. He said that, and I completely believe him. People thrash around and paddle around. I know 2 young guys on the West Coast who go surfing at dawn every day. Exactly when sharks come in to feed, when they come up off the land shelf to feed in the shallows. These 2 guys go out, they paddle out past the breakers, nearly to the land shelf, looking exactly like seals, and just paddling around in the shark's territory. For me, it would be a great white shark. That's why I don't swim in the ocean. Prompt number 5 is trashy books often flourish in specific genres. What is your favorite trashy sub-genre? We're going to have to talk about trash and genres. We'll have a lot of meta discussions. I know I promised a lot of mega discussions for June on the Range, and I didn't get to them. But with Garbaugust, we absolutely have to talk about these things. What is trash? And why does it proliferate so much in genres? I think there's some fairly easy answers to that. But for now, for this prompt, my answer is the Omegaverse. I don't know how many of you listening to this know what I'm talking about. It's almost better if you don't. There is a shared fictional reality called the Omegaverse, in which there are alphas and humans are alphas, betas, and omegas. And there's often a lot of shapeshifting that goes on, but there are also those categories. Those categories exist in humans. And alphas, betas are basically normal people, but alphas are these totally commanding, great, charismatic, overachiever type things, and they can impregnate omegas. And that is true even if the alpha is a man and the omega is a man, or if the alpha is a woman and the omega is a woman. In the Omegaverse, it is possible to write, I guess we have to call them romance novels. It is possible to write romance novels in which there's only one gender. And some of the male-on-male Omegaverse novels get fairly explicit about everything. About everything. Let's just say the anatomy is very similar. A fully clothed alpha at your coffee shop would look completely human. I won't say the same thing about a fully clothed omega because I'm not sure they're allowed to be fully clothed. I'm not sure they have that legal right. But on a doctor's examination table, they would look completely different. Somewhat different in the hoo-ha, especially omegas. If you're wondering how that all works out with a pregnant omega male, again, I don't want to gross any of you out. I'm sure there's a Wikipedia page for the Omegaverse, but let's just say it happens through the pooper scooper. It happens through the poop chute. It is my favorite trashy subject. It's definitely trashy. Definitely. There's never been a good Omegaverse book or short story that I've ever encountered, and I've read much more of it than I should. It's definitely trashy, but the reason that it's my favorite is because the people who dabble in it tend to want to explicate it. They don't just want a fantasy world. I mean, on some very unhealthy levels, it's probably natural that some writers and maybe some readers would want to retreat into a fantasy world in which you don't even bother about the opposite sex. You just have a world that's just us. You don't even have to bother with them for surrogacy. You don't have to bother with them at all. They can just be out of the story. But most Omegaverse writers that I've read don't. That's not why they're doing it. They explicate the universe in which these things exist and try to figure out what downstream effects there would be if this were the biology of the world. And I mean, there's hot and heavy sex scenes in these things all the time. But I confess, nerd that I am, I go to it. I go to some of these things that I read. I read more Omegaverse stuff than I should. But I go to it for the writers who are trying to make sense of it. As dumb a thing as it is to make sense of, I still love that. So I'm going to say the Omegaverse. I don't actually know whether or not there's a Wikipedia page. On some level, I hope not. Anyway, prompt number 6 is famous people love to milk their fans by publishing books. Which celebrity would you like to read a trashy novel by? And here I want to make 2 observations that are connected. One is that no celebrity has ever written their own book. No matter how much they say they have, no matter how bad it is, if in their acknowledgments they thank someone and say, I really appreciate your advice or your tips, it's because that someone wrote the book, every word of it, and put in their contract that you have to mention my name. You can just thank me for assists. You don't have to say that I wrote the thing, but it's in the contract that you have to name me. There are plenty of occasions where that wasn't in the contract, and the author the celebrity simply doesn't mention the person who wrote every single word. Every single word. Sometimes it happens almost always under the cloak of, it was great to have bull sessions with you or to roll around ideas for plot for his interminable tech war books. William Shatner credited Ron Gulart, the great D-list science fiction potboiler author, with just that kind of thing, with guidance. Ron Gulart wrote every word of the tech war books. William Shatner, another a frequent offender, did the same thing with his Shatnerverse Star Trek novels, where he credited over and over again Judith and Gar Reese-Stevens. They wrote every word of it. He didn't write a single thing. And that is true with everything else as well. It's most notorious for celebrity memoirs, where obviously the celebrity is not going to write a memoir. Once in a blue moon, they will contribute more than just, hi, honey, how's it going? But usually not. Usually not. Usually they're not involved at all. That's point number 1 that I want to make about, which celebrity would you like to read a trashy novel by? And the second point that I want to make is connected with the first one, in that the reason why celebrities don't write their own books is not because they're really busy. It's because they're really, really, really stupid. All of them. They're just really, really stupid. Look at YouTube videos of a little barnyard animal, a newborn a sheep that's just got its legs on it, it's just able to walk. You walk out into the yard, and the sheep is fascinated by you, and it wanders off to you. And you walk in another direction, it wobbles off after you in that direction. Watch a YouTube video about someone walking into a yard, and a whole bunch of newborn ducks, little ducklings, will automatically imprint on the person and just follow behind in a line. It doesn't have to be you. They'll do that to a pig that wanders out into the yard, or the house dog that wanders into the yard. That's celebrities. And don't be fooled by the Hollywood PR that says that some are like that, but that others are, I'd be doing dissertations on Schopenhauer if I weren't doing Fast and Furious 11. No, they're all like that. They're all really, really, and for emphasis, really stupid. So they can't write their own books, and no amount of Garbaugust tag prompts is going to make them able to do that. None of them can do it. So, I could say, the question is basically asking which garbage novel would you like to see written by someone's public-facing Hollywood persona? Right? In his version of this tag, Ollie mentions Lady Gaga. There's a public-facing persona and Ollie thinks what Ollie's really saying is he would like a novel written by that public-facing persona. And if we go along those lines, if we say something like that, sure. Like, for instance, we just lost Paul Sorvino, the actor Paul Sorvino. His public-facing persona would probably have written an entertaining, hard-boiled crime novel. Imagine the public-facing Hollywood persona of Paul Sorvino writing, for instance, one of Criminolly's beloved Ed McBain precinct novels. That would be very interesting to do, or maybe an organized crime novel, something like that. It could never happen, but maybe something like that would work. It's really a non-starter for me. If you don't believe me, meet a celebrity. Contrive it somehow. You will see what I mean. Right away, you will. You'll wonder if you should help them down the stairs. That's how bad it is. Anyway, prop number 7 is trashy books have the best covers. Which book on your shelves has the trashiest cover? Here we would have to talk about virtual shelves, not physical shelves. I policed my physical shelves, and there isn't much here. If we talk virtual shelves for ebooks, I'm not going to show you any of the covers, but if you are curious what they look like, the kind of thing they are, just type in Omegaverse, or Alpha and Omega, or Alpha, Omega, and the word slave into Amazon. You will see the covers that come up are the aforementioned Omegaverse books. They're definitely candidates. I would definitely include them. Prompt number 8 is trashy books often contain adult themes. What's a book you read before you were old enough to? And I have an answer to this. It was the first thing that came to mind. I don't want to cause any problems with my answer. I'm not trying to rabble-rouse. But I read a book long before I was old enough to account for the horrors that it contains. And it was the King James Bible. The Old Testament of the King James Bible is the worst, most horrifying fantasy story ever conceived by the mind of human beings. The only reason that it gets as bad as it is because it took more than one human over multiple generations to generate it. No single human could come up with a story as sustainably depraved and violent as the Old Testament of the King James Bible. No single human being could do that. Instead, we have the work of many generations over many centuries, and the cumulative effect is unbelievable. Just unbelievable. It's an almost unremitting story of psychopathically violent and insensitive, cruel, horrible people, male and female, young and old, all of whom are overseen by this unseen supernatural monster who is worse than any of them at all of their moral excesses, and is constantly telling them to be worse, even as bad as they are. They will come crawling on their belly to this horrible fantasy monster, 10 times worse than Sauron or Lord Fowl. They'll come crawling in their belly to this horrible fantasy monster and say, we did 9/10 of the horrible, blood-dripping, sacrificial genocide that you commanded us to do. And that invisible monster will say, what, only 9/10? I ordered you to do 100%. I want you to go back and do the 10% you didn't do, and because you did only 90% the first time, I want you to kill your kids. That is unbelievable. And it never lets up. Virtually never lets up. In the whole course of the Old Testament, it virtually never lets up. And unlike major fantasy epics, like Beowulf or Gilgamesh or The Lord of the Rings or whatever, or the Homer or whatnot, there's no glimmer of hope. There is no escaping that invisible supernatural monster. There is no counterpart. There's no supernatural counterpart to that invisible monster. He runs the show. He is unopposed. No one else can tell him what to do. No one else counters him. There are no Palantirs scattered throughout Palestine. Instead, it's just him. Relentlessly. The only glimmer of relief that happens is when he seems to either get tired or just bored and leave the scene. As long as he's around, there's no relief from him at all. No relief from his bloodthirsty whims. It just, I read all of that many, many times, long before I was ready, long before I was old enough to see that. To think, okay, so here's the story that I'm reading. It's beautifully written, beautifully rendered in the King James Bible, but what's the point of it? Okay, so this invisible supernatural being singled out a person, promised them the moon, in exchange for this horrific act of genocidal violence. The person does the horrific act of genocidal violence and goes back to the unseen supernatural monster, and the supernatural monster says, I've changed my mind, I'm not going to kill you. And the person who committed genocide and killed all these people and maybe feels bad about it dies. So it's not like Lord Fowl decides I will destroy you in 7 years, and in that time the poor schmuck is able to find some allies with staffs and maybe orcus and whatnot. No, the person, his guts just burst. He dies. You read that over and over again. You think, okay, what's the point of this then? What's the point of this story? This invisible supernatural monster is a horrible creature. He makes everyone around him do horrible things, and there is no comeuppance. There is no final reckoning. It's just, that's the story. He's horrible, and he makes everyone around him do horrible things. The end. It was only later, going back to those stories, that I was able to see, that there might be deeper lessons being involving Judaic law and whatnot, involving the nature of mercy or the nature of retribution or a nationalistic kind of post hoc justification or whatever. Later literary type readings. It was only later that I was able to do that. When I first read them, I read them as stories, and I read them intermixed with other stories, like the Iliad. And I thought, okay, so this is going to be basically the same thing. There are supernatural beings in the Iliad, too. But no, no. So I don't advise it. If you want to expose your kids, if you are, for instance, Christian, and you want to expose your kids to the Bible, get one of those children's Bibles that Baudelarizes a lot. Do that. Forever and ever, there was a hardcover, a very pretty thing, lots of illustrations all throughout, called the Children's Bible. I don't know if that's still in print, but it had a huge print run. You see used copies everywhere, at every yard sale in the world. And it basically functions as a Lamb's Tales from Shakespeare. If you want to start exposing your kids, definitely don't expose them to the Old Testament and the King James Bible. Don't do that. Instead, give them Baudelarized versions to acquaint them with the characters. Then prompt number 9 is, if there were a character in a shifter romance, which is shapeshifting, if you were, what creature would you want, or you or your partner, to shift into? I almost thought this was a trick question, but I'm going to answer it anyway. Of course, that would be dogs. Of course, it would be dogs. I am contractually obligated. I am not legally allowed to shapeshift into anything else. And then prop number 10 is tag the trashiest booktubers you know. Now, I have a bunch of recipients here. The first 3 are not trashy. In fact, I went for the booktubers who are the least trashy booktubers that I know, just to smear them with the tar of Garbaugust. So that is Read by Fred, Will's Infinite Library, and Micah Cummins, who I don't think, if you watched any of the videos, I think the last word you'd associate with any of them would be trash, but now they have touched pitch and been defiled. Then there are some candidates that may or may not be trashy. I suspect that they might have some trashy abilities inside them. Of course, Sarah, the bookish knitter, has to do a version of this tag, I would hope. She mostly reads romances. And if you were to ask the reader on the street, just an ordinary person picked at random, what is trashy literature? They would instantly say romances. And again, they would be wrong most of the time. But again, that raises the question of what is trash. We have to deal with that. We will in August. So I'm going to tag the Bookish Knitter and also Heather Gregg, who's that close to 100 subscribers. She's that close. And any of you who are booktubers will know there's something magical about 3 digits. There's something magical about that. So if you want to go over, and I'll leave a link to her channel and subscribe, and heave her up over 100 subscribers, that would be awesome. And also Jordan Parsons. Who doesn't read trash ever, as far as I know, but maybe has in the past. And Jordan, much like Sarah, is personally connected with the subject, not through books, but through his choice of pets. Sarah's connected with the subject of trash because she reads romance novels and has had to deal forever with snobby readers saying trash is romance, romance is trash, they are the same. And Jordan's favorite pets are his beautiful rats. And he knows them really well, and they know him really well, as you can tell when you see them cavorting in his videos. But ask any person. Ask your average person, what's a trash animal? The very first thing they would say would be rats. They have no conception of how funny or playful or idiosyncratic or loving rats can be. No conception at all. So I'm going to tag Jordan as well. And then I'll also tag Nick Stewart. He's sort of in the vein of me not really knowing whether or not he has any trashy tendencies. And just to open the field completely, I went to the BookTube newbie tag and picked a newbie at random. I picked a BookTube channel called Pato, a young guy named Pato. I have no idea what he likes to read, no idea whether or not he's ever read trash, no idea whether or not maybe he's a BookTube newbie. Some of them don't do tags. They don't want to get involved in the community. I have no idea at all, but I watched his BookTube newbie tag and liked it. I got quite a bit of Gen Z anomy, where it's just in your contract that you have to phrase every single thing that comes out of your mouth as if you don't give a rip one way or another about anything. Just about anything. Just even when he's talking about things that he enthusiastically loves, he still sounds like he's talking about a random rock that he found on the ground. And I'm hoping that Gen Z anomy, is not anime, but anomy, A-N-O-M-I-E, is something that this generation just grows out of. Right now they are firmly caught up in the weird attitude that it is somehow dorky or weird or lame or cringe to care about things, but it's not. It's actually the exact opposite of that. But there's definitely a brain at work there, and I thought I should tag a newbie. I like to tag newcomers to BookTube to welcome them to the community. I don't know how much a trash tag is welcoming anybody to the community, but feel free to go and look at his channel. And he's tagged if he wants to do it. So there you go. Those are the deplorables that I'm tagging. And I will leave a list of all the deplorables with whom I am doing Trash August. We're doing Garbaugust in just a week. Garbaugust will be upon us. And I have a suspicion that it will be just as popular as June on the Range, but maybe not as vocally popular. I wonder how many of you will admit how much garbage you have lined up to read in August. I hope you do. There's no shame in this game. I want not only for you to read a lot of garbage in August, especially a lot of garbage that you have clogging up your Kindle or on your bookshelves. I not only want you to read all of that stuff and know that you at least have 13 disreputable individuals reading it along with you. I also want to see it. So if you're a booktuber, please participate in Garbaugust. But anyway, this has gone on quite long enough, so I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, booktubers.